In early colonial America, jails were not for long-term confinement. They held debtors, the accused, and those awaiting trial or punishment. Public humiliation was common. Stocks, pillories, and whippings shamed and deterred wrongdoing. Early jails were crude and overcrowded. Conditions were harsh, with rampant disease. Imprisonment as punishment evolved slowly. Hard labor was seen as fitting for most crimes. The Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia, established in 1790, marked a shift in thinking. It aimed to reform offenders through solitary confinement, religious reflection, and hard labor. The 19th century witnessed a significant shift in penal philosophy. Reformers, driven by Enlightenment ideals, sought to replace corporal punishment with more humane and rehabilitative approaches. This led to the rise of the penitentiary, a new type of institution designed for long-term confinement and focused on reforming the criminal. Two main systems emerged in the United States, the Pennsylvania System and the Auburn System. The Pennsylvania System, championed at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, emphasized solitary confinement. Prisoners were kept in separate cells, isolated from all human contact, except for religious instruction and occasional visits from reformers. The goal was to induce penitence and reflection, leading to moral reformation. In contrast, the Auburn System, developed at Auburn Prison in New York, allowed prisoners to work together in silence during the day. They were confined to individual cells at night. This system, which emphasized strict discipline and obedience, became the dominant model in the United States. The Auburn System's emphasis on silence, obedience, and industrial labor influenced prison design throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Many prisons adopted the distinctive telephone pole architecture, with long cell blocks radiating from a central hub for surveillance. This design facilitated control and minimized opportunities for prisoner communication and resistance. As the 20th century progressed, prison architecture and security measures evolved further. Alcatraz Island, operational from 1934 to 1963, exemplified this trend. Its remote location, state-of-the-art security features, and reputation for housing high-profile criminals made it a symbol of America's commitment to containing its most dangerous offenders. While Alcatraz represented the pinnacle of high-security confinement, other institutions experimented with different approaches. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed an unprecedented expansion of the American prison system. Driven by a complex interplay of social, political, and economic factors, the United States embraced a tough-on-crime approach that led to mass incarceration. Mandatory minimum sentences, stricter drug laws, and increasingly punitive sentencing guidelines fueled this growth. The war on drugs, launched in the 1980s, had a particularly profound impact on incarceration rates. As a result of these policies, the U.S. prison population exploded, disproportionately affecting communities of color. The U.S., with only 5% of the world's population, imprisons nearly 25% of the world's incarcerated individuals. This mass incarceration has had devastating consequences for individuals, families, and communities, perpetuating cycles of poverty, trauma, and social exclusion. Section 5. The Prison Industrial Complex. Profits and punishment. The rapid expansion of the prison system gave rise to the prison industrial complex, a term used to describe the interconnected web of corporations, politicians, and government agencies that profit from mass incarceration. Private prisons, which emerged in the 1980s, played a significant role in this complex. By housing inmates for profit, these companies created a financial incentive to maintain high incarceration rates. Beyond private prisons, numerous industries benefit from the vast prison population, including food service providers, construction companies, and manufacturers of security equipment. This confluence of economic interests has made it challenging to implement meaningful reforms that would reduce the number of people incarcerated. The prison industrial complex raises ethical questions about the role of punishment and rehabilitation in a society where profit motives intersect with criminal justice. Section 6. Reform and Retribution, Shifting Sands in the Late 20th Century. As the 20th century drew to a close, a growing awareness of the social and economic costs of mass incarceration began to fuel calls for reform. Advocates highlighted the racial disparities in the criminal justice system, the ineffectiveness of harsh sentencing policies, and the need for greater investment in rehabilitation and re-entry programs. Some states experimented with alternative sentencing options, such as drug courts and community-based programs, in an effort to reduce recidivism and break the cycle of incarceration. However, this era also witnessed a countervailing trend toward harsher sentencing laws, driven by fears of rising crime rates and a desire for increased public safety. Three strikes laws, which mandated lengthy sentences for repeat offenders, gained popularity in many states. These laws, while aimed at deterring crime, often resulted in disproportionately harsh sentences for non-violent offenses. Section 7. The Era of Supermax Extreme Isolation and Its Consequences. The late 20th and early 21st centuries saw the rise of supermax prisons, facilities designed for the extreme isolation of inmates deemed too dangerous or disruptive for the general prison population. These facilities, often characterized by solitary confinement, limited human contact, and heightened security measures, have been criticized for their detrimental psychological effects on prisoners. Prolonged isolation can exacerbate mental health issues, leading to anxiety, depression, and even psychosis. While proponents argue that supermax prisons are necessary to manage high-risk inmates and maintain order within the prison system, critics argue that they are inhumane and counterproductive to rehabilitation. The use of solitary confinement in particular has come under intense scrutiny, with many human rights organizations condemning it as a form of torture. The debate over supermax prisons highlights the tension between security concerns and the ethical treatment of prisoners, even those who have committed heinous crimes. Section 8. The Future of Incarceration, Towards Rehabilitation or Deeper into Despair. As the United States grapples with mass incarceration, the future of its prison system hangs in the balance. A growing movement for reform recognizes the human and economic costs of mass imprisonment. There is a push for sentencing reform, alternatives to incarceration, and a focus on rehabilitation. Some states have policies to reduce prison populations, but challenges remain. Political resistance to reform, fueled by fears of crime, remains strong. The prison industrial complex continues to shape policy decisions. Racial and economic disparities persist, demanding systemic solutions. The future of incarceration in the U.S. depends on today's choices, towards mass imprisonment or a more humane approach.